Hey guys, so today is going to be day 5 of Glory Be. I'm going to read chapter 8. So yesterday, well, still today for me, 5 minutes ago for me, but for you guys probably yesterday or the last time you did the assignment, we read chapter 7 and we found 4 important events and you made a prediction. Today, you are going to keep doing important events, okay? So you're going to keep watching and reading and following along to hear all of the important events that are happening. And really similarly to yesterday, I'm going to stop when I find those important events. I'll talk to you about why it's important and what we already know and what we can infer, and then we'll write them down together. So I even wrote my important events from yesterday on just whatever I could find. Today I'll probably use the back of this, okay? So you're just kind of jotting down to keep track of it. Then you're going to fill out the Google form that's right next to this in your Google Classroom. And you're going to do the same thing as yesterday. Important events, make a prediction. So chapter 7 was really long, which is why it lasted a whole day. Chapter 8 is the same. So we are just doing chapter 8 today. And it is called Letters to the Tribune. The Tribune is usually the name of a newspaper. So like a newspaper or a journal or something that's published that people read. So we're going to be reading about letters that people send to newspapers to be published in an article. The next night before supper time, Emma wiped her hands on her apron and stood back to admire her creation. I hope your new friend likes this chicken spaghetti casserole. All Yankees like spaghetti, I said. Of course, I didn't know one single Yankee except Laura. So I thought for a minute. I hope Jessalyn won't act snotty to us because we're only 11, I said. I'll make sure Jessalyn behaves. Emma picked up the big silver knife to swirl the last bit of icing onto a sweet-smelling cake. She's not always nice to me these days, I said. And she argues with Daddy. Emma pointed her knife to the ceiling as if Jessalyn could hear. That girl would argue with a signpost. But your sister's just growing up. She'll be back to playing with you in a while, Glory. She wants to move into Mama's old sewing room. And you heard her fussing at me and Frankie about his daddy and all, I said. Jessalyn claims I don't know a thing about what's going around here this summer. Emma raised one eyebrow and shook her head. She reached into the cupboard for the dishes with the little blue birds on them. Extra folks coming and going don't make this kitchen any cooler. Get on out there and set the table, but be careful with these. She set the plates down gently. It's your mama's best china, special for tonight. And then she opened the refrigerator door and stood there fanning her face with her apron. I wanted to edge right next to her to cool off, but I could take a hint. I moved to the dining room just as Jessalyn tromped downstairs with big rollers in her hair. Are you wearing those to the dinner table? I tried to ask Jessalyn nicely. I'm going to the library after supper to get a book, she answered, like it was the stupidest question in the entire universe. To see that boy again, I thought, when Jessalyn headed back upstairs to her floor-length mirror. I didn't say a word, though. I liked knowing secrets, and for now, I was working hard at keeping this one. By the time my sister pressed back downstairs with her hair looking like she'd stepped out of the beauty parlor, Daddy and I were on the front porch swinging. When a car stopped at the curb, he put down his newspaper. I waved to Laura, who was taking baby steps over the crack in the sidewalk. A lady who must be her mama stepped out of the car. Hey, y'all, come meet my daddy, Brother Joe Hemphill. He's the preacher over here at First Fellowship United Church. Daddy put out his hand to welcome her. Laura, pleased to meet you. Is this your mother? I'm happy to meet you, Reverend Hemphill. Miss Bloom has spoken highly of your family. Laura's mama talked funny like Laura. But the smile creeping across her face made me think I wouldn't even mind being sick if she could be my nurse. Can you stay for supper? Daddy asked her. I'm late for my meeting, Mrs. Lampert said. Thank you. Some other time? She turned to give Laura a hug before she walked down the sidewalk and opened her car door. I'll pick you up after dinner, she called back. At 9:30 sharp, Laura glanced down the street one more time and then followed me inside. This is my sister, Jessalyn, I introduced, and Emma. Emma nodded Laura's way. Jessalyn looked Laura up and down, from her long braid to her heavy brown sandals with black socks, but she didn't say anything bad. Once in a blue moon, Jessalyn could be nice if she tried. The way Laura stood off to herself, with her hands folded tight in front of her and her lips pressed close together. It seemed like maybe she wasn't used to meeting new people, especially if the family of somebody who she'd first laid eyes on in the library 2 days ago. Maybe she just didn't like hanging moss yet. I aimed to change that. Supper will be ready soon, I told Laura. Want to see my room? She nodded and followed me upstairs. I did all the talking. That's my mama's old sewing machine. I looked inside the room, where is now Emma, who made our Halloween costumes and our curtains. I don't hardly remember my mama, but Emma made me a quilt in there that reminds me of her when I was a little girl. I kept on walking and talking, hoping Laura would say something pretty soon. This is my room, and Jesslyn's. All that messy stuff is hers. I pointed to the jumble of lipsticks and mascara falling off of Jesslyn's dresser. Don't know why she minds sharing a room with me, but she does. She claims she's moving to the sewing room. I picked up a white boot with tassels on it and held it up. Pep Squad. She and her friends march around the football field wearing these and twirling batons. Do you have a sister? I asked. Laura shook her head. I don't have brothers or sisters, she said. The big sister would sure be fun. Well, it used to be fun, I said. When Laura picked up The Secret of the Old Clock from my row of books, she turned the pages so carefully that I couldn't help but wonder if she planned to hide in my room reading all night. I needed a quick make her glad to be here. I took the Buster Brown shoebox from under my bed and slowly untied the purple ribbon. Want to see my junk poker box? What's junk poker? It's a card game. Jesslyn and I made it up when we were little. We bet against each other with stuff in our boxes. I spread my treasures on the bedspread. I tossed a jack's ball up and down, waiting for Laura to say something. But she'd hardly glanced up from The Secret of the Old Clock. Folks over at the church, they don't exactly approve of cards. So Jesslyn and me, we've kept junk poker a secret from our daddy. My grandpa plays cards, she said. He taught me some games. When Laura finally put down the book, she moved next to me and picked up one of the conch shells. That got her talking. They say you can hear the waves crashing in there. You're holding my favorite, I told her. I'm never betting that shell. My mother promised me we'd be going to the beach this summer, but we ended up coming here to Hanging Moss instead. Laura held my shell up to her ear. Some days, wouldn't you like to just disappear into the ocean inside? The beach would have been more fun than this hot place. No water here except for the pea pool and the community pool. My friend Frankie swears that's about to close down, I sighed. After a minute, Laura leaned back on the big pillows lined up on my bed. My mother keeps reminding me that we're here to help, she said. But staying this summer in a place where you don't know anyone and there's really nothing to do? Laura's voice trailed off and she hugged the shell closer to her. Well, you know me now, I said. And then I spied my record box filled with my new 45s, and I grabbed it off the shelf. Hey, Laura, ever heard of the Beatles? She put down the shell and scooted to the edge of my bed. I love the Beatles. Did you see them on TV? Which one's your favorite? And after that, until Emma called us down to supper, all we did was sing along with my records, pretending that we were John and Paul. All we talked about was how much better the Beatles sang than Elvis. When Laura handed my shell back, I packed my treasures in the Buster Brown shoebox and I hid it under my bed. I cut off the record player and put away my Beatles records. So, we're going to stop here. We found our first important event. Laura, first when she comes over to Glory's house, she feels really shy and kind of unsure. She acts like she doesn't want to be in Hanging Moss. She'd rather be at the beach with her mom like her mom had promised. And so, after listening to these records and after playing together for a little bit, it seems like they've become friends, which is a really important event. So, we're going to add that to our important events list. We're going to add that Laura and Glory have become friends. Okay. So now we're at the bottom page 48. We know that Laura and Glory have become friends, and now Emma is calling them down for dinner. Harrison, We talked about after nap time for Charlotte. All right. Downstairs, Laura sat next to me in the dining room table across from Jess Lynn. Daddy took his chair last and bowed his head. Bless this food, Lord, and those who have prepared it for us today, he prayed. Watch over Laura and her mama and all the visitors here in Hanging Moss. Thank you for your bountiful goodness. Amen. It was finally time to eat. From where I sat, I had a clear view of Emma in the kitchen. Pretty soon she untied her apron and smoothed out her white uniform. When she brought the blue china casserole dish into the dining room and offered it to Laura, and then to me, she looked like the ladies in the school cafeteria who watched every bite we took. Emma finished serving the spaghetti and then moved into the kitchen. But she was hovering and listening right inside the door. Shh. Daddy beamed around the table, tucked in his big white napkin under his chin. Right off, he said, I hope you like it here, Laura. If you hadn't had a chance to go to the pool or over to Fireman's Park, maybe you'd like to go with Glory one day. Laura picked up her napkin and spread it in her lap over her skirt. She took one little bite at a time and chewed with her mouth closed. Jess Lynn broke her piece of hot bread in two. Glory says your mother's a nurse. My mother works at the Freedom Clinic. Laura sat up straight. It's for Negro people who don't have doctors. She scooted mushrooms from spaghetti sauce off to one side of her plate, twirled a noodle, and picked at a bite of chicken. Any minute now, I expected Emma to call out, Laura Lampert, you stop playing with your food, like she'd do if it was me twirling and scooting. But Emma didn't say a word. She stood real still with her hands pushed hard in her pockets. Miss Bloom says Laura's mother's here to help poor people, and that the clinic's helping our town, I announced. I looked at Jess Lynn and then back at my daddy. It's good that you and your mother gave up your summer for those in need, isn't it, girls? He said. Do you have family back in Ohio? He asked Laura. Just my grandma and grandpa, she answered. She kept her eyes on the napkin in her lap. They're worried, she said quietly. They didn't want us to come. I put down my fork and I stopped chewing. Why not? Jess Lynn ignored me and looked right at Laura. Have you been reading about the civil rights workers in the paper? My mother says we mustn't read the newspapers here, Laura said. They've been making up hateful things about our friends and causing trouble. I've read letters to the editor of Hanging Moss Tribune saying they should stay up north where they belong, Jess Lynn said. Not everybody agrees with the newspaper, though. Who writes letters like that, I asked. Frankie's daddy's not too happy about what's going on. You reckon he writes to the newspaper? A lot of folks are pleased about the Freedom Clinic your mama's running, Daddy said. You'll see. People will come around. Why would anybody not like a clinic that helps poor people, I asked. Most I read in our newspaper was what was playing at the picture show. Sometimes Frankie would make fun of the paper's society page, silly stuff about parties and who's visiting in Hanging Moss. I've never read letters from people up north here to make trouble. You're too young to read letters to the newspaper editor, Glory. Jess Lynn stuck her nose up in the air. She took a sip of her iced tea and then smiled with her lips closed. When you're old enough, you'll realize what was going on here this summer. I am old enough. It's not like you know everything. What are you doing to help those in need, like Daddy says? Jess Lynn had stopped being nice and was back up on her high horse again. My big sister could be so aggravating. I wanted to kick her under the table hard. But when I glanced over at Laura, she was looking back and forth from me to Jess Lynn and twisting her napkin in her lap with both hands. Right then, I decided I'd be nice to Jess Lynn. I got an idea. Miss Bloom asked me and Laura to do a special story time when the library has their thank you celebration after the 4th of July. I smiled real big at Laura and then back at my sister. Maybe you could help us, Jess Lynn. Miss Bloom's inviting Laura's mama and her friends, too. All those Yankees coming to our library. Daddy looked like he might be about to say something, and then he changed his mind. Jess Lynn stopped her fork midway to her mouth. They got all quiet. Maybe what I said about the library worried them. When just then, Emma stepped into the dining room holding up her red velvet cake. And Jess Lynn looked at the clock ticking away at the buffet. May I be excused? She asked. I'm late for meeting Mary Louise at the library. She pushed her chair back from the table. It's nice to have you for supper, Laura, she said. and then she smiled at my friend. But not me, of course. When we'd finished our cake, Emma appeared at the table to brush crumbs off the linen tablecloth. "Thank you for the delicious dinner," Laura said, after she'd eaten every last bite of her cake. Maybe my new friend had found something to like here in Hanging Moss after all. When Daddy headed back up to the living room, I folded my napkin and stood up. "We'll clear the plates," I told Emma. "You girls go on outside. Frankie will be here to play before you know it." She stopped brushing crumbs and looked right at me. "You be careful of his brother, Glory. That boy has a mean streak about him." And then the swinging door creaked shut, and the bright white of Emma's uniform skirt disappeared into the kitchen. So, when Glory says that even Jesslyn's being nice to Laura, and her daddy says that, it's really nice to have you over for supper, Laura, and your family's doing such great things, helping the Freedom Clinic, it shows that Glory's family accepts Laura, which is a really important event, because it shows that Glory and Laura can be friends, and her family is okay with it, instead of some other families, like Frankie's family wouldn't be okay with it because she's from the north. So that's an important event to add, that Glory's family accepts Laura. So today, we only have 2 important events, and you're going to make a prediction. You're going to make a prediction about what's going to happen in chapter 9. So we know that they just finished up supper, which is dinner, and Glory and Laura are going to go head outside because Emma says, well, Frankie will be here to play soon. And we've read from our last chapter, and you made a prediction about what might happen because we can tell that Frankie doesn't like Laura even though he's never met her. So I want you to make a prediction now. Glory and Laura are going to go outside to play, and Frankie's going to be there soon. What do you think might happen? Make sure you have your 2 important events, and you make a prediction, and I'll see you for the next chapter.